ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Osint Bunker podcast. Today it is Season 2, Episode 12. This is the season finale for Season 2, and we are dubbing it the Ukraine Special in light of the fact that we will probably talk about very little else today. I'm joined this evening by Kyle J. Glenn and Osinttechnical, the two co-hosts here on the Osint Bunker podcast. We're going to get into it shortly, but we just wanted to obviously start out by making very, very clear we are obviously devastated by the scenes from Ukraine in the last few days. We're very well aware that last episode, episode 11, we were very, very clear that we were expecting this to happen. That doesn't make any of the scenes or the casualties any less shocking and distressing, and we want to, particularly for those listeners of ours in Ukraine, and I know there are a few of you out in the Ukraine who do listen to the podcast. We just want to express our solidarity with you guys and our utmost respect for you as a nation, with everything that's been going on the last few days and the astonishing determination that you guys have shown in the face of, frankly, overwhelming odds. Hopefully this episode will go some way in helping to make the world more aware of what is going on in Ukraine. Obviously there has been a significant amount of coverage from international media, but hopefully we'll be able to sort of expand on that a little bit, go into a little bit more detail on certain things, and we want to just give a shout out as well to the UK Defence Journal, who in the last week have set up a charity donation scheme for the people of Ukraine. We'll put a link to that in the description of the podcast tonight. You'll be able to go to the UK Defence Journal website and basically buy a t-shirt showing your solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and all of the money that the UK Defence Journal would have earned from those shirt sales is being sent directly to charities in Ukraine. And so with that, I think it's time we get on really to discussing the topic of the week, the topic of the month, possibly going to end up being the topic of the year, I suppose. Although
I think it's going to be one of the most talked things of the decade or more. It's the way things are going.
I mean, I think it's going to have. It's certainly giving Afghanistan a run for its money. But yes.
Mm-hmm. No, this is like. This is 100 times worse than what happened in Afghanistan. I'm sorry, Afghanistan, if you look at the number of people who were, the long-term impacts of Afghanistan, of course, were larger. Or not even that, we don't know what the long-term impacts of this are going to be. They could be significantly larger than Afghanistan. I mean, at the end of the day, U.S. forces were able to extricate themselves and literally multiple hundreds of thousands of people from Afghanistan in like a 2-week period. And with only one, particularly bad incident, which was the bombing at Abbey Gate. And that was something that we saw, it was horrible. It was bad to watch it. There was a lot more commentary, though, on, the long-term implications of the entire war. There was more of a narrative to put together that people were talking about. At the end of the day, there were less... It was a much different situation than what we're seeing now. Of course, again, longer-term impacts for the Afghan people were objectively worse. They've seen a lot of impacts, and there's a lot of blame to go around for that as well. But what we're seeing in Ukraine is a combination of a massive humanitarian disaster, a large-scale war, a larger raising of the tensions between Russia and NATO, and frankly, Russia and the rest of the world, to be honest, because after the UN speech today, and we're recording this at 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. GMT, but what we just saw at the UN meeting was basically the entire world community going to Russia and saying this is not a legal invasion. There is no justification for this. There is nothing that indicates that this was justified in any way, shape, or form. And that's the larger geopolitical element of it. Of course, we've seen pretty much every country jump onto some form of sanctions. We've even seen, and I know I'm probably giving this more weight than it deserves, certain organizations in China start to restrict trade with Russia in fear of sanctions. If it sounds like I'm yawning, I am, because I've been up for 24 hours straight. Which, obviously it's going to be, my takes are going to be very hot, be that as it may. But we've just seen this larger sort of global rejection of this Russian invasion. I don't think I've seen so many people surrounding and commenting and being aware of an issue. I mean, I could walk to a random person on the street in the US right now and ask them about what their opinion of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is. And A, they'll know what's happening. And B, they'll probably give me, an opinion, and it's probably going to be Russia did something wrong, or, Russia's invading Ukraine, or whatever. But on top of that, it's just, we've seen countries that historically have never taken a stance on these issues. I mean, Switzerland, who has not taken an international stance since 1815, sanctioned Russia and banned Russian flights from its airspace, which again, the banning of the Russian flights from its airspace was a purely symbolic move. It was every other country in Europe had banned, Russian flights from their airspace. Switzerland was alone. They didn't have to do it, but they did it as a symbolic move to indicate what their opinions of the Russian invasion was.
Russian flights couldn't even get to Switzerland once the other ones had got, banned it.
There was no purpose for this. It was literally just a symbolic move to say, to just, this big middle finger to Russia. But we've just seen this global backlash. And we saw that at the UN today. And it's not like it was unfounded. I mean, if you look at the situation, Russia built up troops for months, frankly, since last year.
It's been a year. It's been since March, April 2021. This has been
because we saw there are VDV units, there are Russian airborne units that moved into Crimea over a year ago, who have stayed there for over a year and are now traipsing around southern Ukraine. And those ones are actually causing the most issues, probably because they've been sitting in Crimea training for the past year. But it is just it's something I think we saw coming for a while, but it's still incredibly surprising, I guess, in that it was such a bad political move. It was such a bad international political move in that Putin managed to effectively align the entire world against him. And then he started threatening to use, nuclear weapons, or he didn't threaten to use them. He alluded to the threat. Which again made more countries even more angry. I mean, China doesn't want a nuclear war. Like
Now, China's winning the economic war. They don't need it to go hot right now.
Yeah, they don't want anything to go hot. It's against their best interests. And so you'll see China working in the background to prevent something like that happening. I will comment that during their speech at the UN, they did specifically say that, and I'm going to go bring up what they specifically said, because I actually typed out what they said verbatim. They said, all countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity should be respected, which, again, is sort of a China thing because they don't recognize Taiwan as a country, so it actually didn't box them into a corner there. But it was very specifically aimed at the Russian invasion.
Didn't they go on, though, and say, they said something specific about, like, they understand, like, the, Ukraine-Russia situation, and they kind of almost...
Yeah, they were also
kind of
saying
almost
things...
didn't compare it to Taiwan, but they kind of alluded to it being like, oh, but this doesn't, it doesn't count, like, Ukraine's sovereignty isn't really being affected in this case.
Yeah, and they also made comments like Ukraine should be, a conduit between the East and the West. But again, I think the major statement there was, one country's security should not come at the expense of another's. which
Mhm.
just was a very strong rebuke of the Russian actions. In if you sort of read under the words themselves.
No,
Um,
definitely.
but I mean, at the same time, if you look at the situation, it's not good for China. It's a destabilizing thing for them, and they don't like that because it takes China out of the driver's seat. And they like being in the driver's seat.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of not being in the driver's seat, that can pretty much be described as, how Russia's invasion is going at the moment, is really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
definitely not going
it's slowly
anywhere near as
changing from
well.
that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw just before we started recording, I saw someone posted on Twitter an archived copy of the Russian media RIA Novosti, an article that they posted on their site on the 26th of February. So that was
2 weeks ago.
Saturday. So yeah, so the invasion started on the morning of the
24th.
24th. Am I
Yeah.
correct on that? Everything has just merged into one. It's the 24th. So we're 5 days in now. So an article they posted on the 26th. I'm not going to read the whole thing, obviously. But it was basically a celebratory article, obviously expected ahead of Russia's expected victory. So some choice quotes in the second paragraph. It says Russia is restoring its unity, the tragedy of 1991, obviously the collapse of the Soviet Union. Terrible catastrophe has been overcome through war. It then also goes on to state Ukraine has returned to Russia. And just a bunch of it was basically an article that was obviously scheduled to go out. They were expecting this war to be over by what time was it scheduled? 8 a.m. GMT on Saturday. So they expected this war to be over well within 48 hours. And we're now entering. Well, we're entering the night. It is currently. It's what is it? 7 o'clock here. So it's
Fifth
currently
day.
10. Yeah, it's 10 past 9 at night in
We're gonna
Ukraine, in
release this
Kiev,
video at
on the
some
fifth
point.
day.
It's the fifth-ish day.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Fifth
day
going
5.
into the
It's day
sixth.
5. Yeah, we're going into the fifth night, I think. And Russia, they don't have Kiev, they don't have Mariupol, they don't have Kharkiv. They haven't made any significant gains really in the Donbass region.
Their
The
air
only
force is non-existent over Ukraine. Just
yeah,
gonna be dead honest. They have done limited strikes
Yeah.
and
yeah,
very little to actually gain air superiority. I mean, again, I know the whole Ghost of Kiev thing. Yes, that's completely real. 100% believe in it. But even if the pilot only shot down a few Russian, aircraft, a few Russian aircraft got shot down, during the first day, and they really have not tried to regain air superiority in any
no,
meaningful
they've got
way.
spooked. They got spooked big time by the Ukrainian air defense. I think. Yeah, like I said, I think even Oryx on Twitter. I don't have his tweet up right now, but I believe he himself has confirmed through like visual imagery, not even any MOG claims, that there's been maybe 2 or 3 Russian jets shot down, as well as I think maybe 5, 6 helicopters, and then 70, 80, Russian armored vehicles, 20 or 30 tanks. I'll try and find the tweet now while I'm just rambling on. And also, at least I believe 2 Buk SAM systems were destroyed by, the Ukrainian TB2 drones, which is unbelievable. That
Actually, there's
they
just
they were
news
even
that come out. There's just news that came out, and I'll use this just so we have a recent thing. Apparently, a TB2 struck a Russian fuel train
a fuel
significantly
train.
behind the lines.
Oh, that's proper World War II, isn't it? Like the kind of the videos, like a picture of like the gun cams of like strafing runs on like
Yeah.
field. I'm seeing,
Yeah,
I'm
let me.
literally on Oryx's Twitter now. I'm seeing some screenshots.
Yeah, it is. That
Um,
is again, and Oryx was key with this. It is humiliation. The Russians cannot get rid of these TB2s. Like again, the TB2s that have been conducting effective suppression of enemy air defenses with short-range guided missiles.
yeah, I mean, I'm
And
just
they
trying.
have
I'm just
been
looking up the specs. I mean, the maximum speed of the TB2 is 120 knots, so around 220 kilometers an hour.
The
It cruises
TB2
at
is
around
some sheet
130.
metal. The
Yeah,
TB2 is some sheet metal, a motorcycle engine, a
not
pretty
stealth in
good
any way.
a pretty good optics sensor, and like some missiles basically just slapped onto the wings.
I mean, okay,
And the Russians
it's not quite
cannot
that
get rid of
It's
them.
more than that. It's more than that.
I think you might offend our viewers from a certain country by making comments like that,
But it's
I don't know if I am, because apparently the TB2s are the freaking, next best thing since sliced bread.
No, and I mean it's been battle proven like in how many countries now? So we've got the Russia-Ukraine war,
Well, the
Syria,
whole point, I
Libya,
think, with the
Nagorno-Karabakh.
TB2 was
Yeah,
that the TB2 never fought like a good integrated air defense network, which is
Until this
apparently
war,
what the
yeah.
Russians are supposed to have. But now we have Ukrainian TB2s running around Kiev, bombing Russian buck positions.
yes.
The fact that they were allowed to get airborne is a failure in itself.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have thought that like these TB2s when they were doing like training and exercises, in the lead up to the war, they were fully visible on flight tracking sites. You could see the airbase they took off from, you could see the airbase they landed at. It was no secret where these TB2s were being based.
Yeah.
And then the fact that this wasn't one of the first targets of the Russian initial strikes on a Thursday morning is, I don't know, maybe did they think that they could handle them when they did eventually get airborne? Were they not? They still focusing on maybe like the kind of manned aircraft, which a lot of the targets were. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I get the impression that the Russians were overly confident. And perhaps, perhaps they had every right to be. I mean, if you'd said to me 3 months ago when we were sort of initially discussing the possibility of a Russian invasion on the podcast, I probably would have said, yeah, Russia will manage to pretty much flatten Ukraine in a week, maybe less. But
No, I agree.
I think the Russians probably had that very same thought process. And at the end of the day, when you've got 190,000 odd troops on the border of this country, and you've got various air assets you've moved in, and goodness knows how many like ground vehicles of all various shapes, sizes, and types, and all the air defense systems that the Russians have brought in, and you've got Belarus helping you out. Okay, maybe they had a right to be confident in their ability, but I think a combination of the Ukrainian people being incredibly tenacious in the way that they have conducted themselves, and the fact that perhaps the Russians didn't throw everything into this fight from day one and are now being made to look very, very stupid for it when it's a little bit too late now to sort of surprise the Ukrainians with it.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians, they genuinely look like they're going to lose this and lose it quite badly, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, as things stand, today in the evening of the fifth day, it's definitely looking a lot more positive for Ukraine than it was on, should we say, midnight Wednesday night ahead of the invasion, which is when it seemed obviously the US originally said they had intelligence that it was going to be the 16th. And of course, I mean, I know why they said that. Maybe to let the Russians know that they know and get them to call it off. Kind of a last throw of the dice kind of thing. And of course, when it didn't happen, as I think when the US made that announcement, I think everyone in our chats was in agreement. Okay, well, it's definitely not going to happen on these dates anymore. Even if it was planned to, it's no longer going to happen because. If you're playing, I don't know, anything, you're in any kind of sport or you're playing a game of chess, if someone says, "Oh, I know you're going to do this move," it would make absolutely zero sense to make that move unless you were very, very confident that it was still the best thing to do. So when Russia didn't invade on the 16th, I don't think anyone was particularly surprised. Of course, you've got the Russian state media gloating and saying, it's of course they did, which then makes it even more ridiculous when when was the 16th? That was 12 days ago. Almost exactly a week. I think almost exactly a week later when they did then launch the invasion of Ukraine. Just makes it absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I think with the US, kind of showing the intelligence they had, kind of spooked Russia a little bit, and has kind of led to, from what we've seen on the ground, soldiers being sent into Ukraine with no idea where they're going, no idea what they're doing, no idea what their orders are,
Yeah. Their
no
phones
idea
taken
what
away from
object.
them. They had,
Yeah,
and I think I mentioned this on the last podcast episode, is that Russians don't have the best navigation tools down to like, the squad level and the effective fire team level. So it's a bit easier for them to get, lost while driving around and while, moving around. I think one of the other main issues is that there's been a general. I think the Russians went in first thinking that the Ukrainians would just roll over a la 2014. And they could just, walk into Kiev and, green men sit on the, front steps of the presidential headquarters and everything and just say they own the place. And then that didn't happen. And then their second idea was, well, we need to limit, civilian casualties. Let's try to, push through and avoid the cities and just head towards Kiev and try to basically make the Russia or the Ukrainian army fall in the field. And then that didn't work because the Ukrainian army fought a very effective fighting retreat back towards Kiev, and they're still, fighting in Kharkiv. And they managed to keep themselves organized and, raise up territorial defense force units and start distributing weapons to reservists. But then the Russians are sort of stuck in a point where I think that was yesterday, or it technically because the podcast delayed 2 days ago by the time you're probably listening to this. But we saw Russian forces try to make assaults, VDV based, into both Kiev and Kharkiv. We saw primarily foot mobile recon based assault into Kharkiv that just got absolutely destroyed. And then also we saw a mechanized VDV assault that was a bit lighter, but was trying to just, take Ivanov. And the Ukrainians performed a very effective ambush and pretty much destroyed a company's worth of mechanized forces. And so we've seen these Russian errors in strategy, but it's understandable errors. Though I don't think it's something the Russians have been able to sort of keep going, and I feel like they're going to make adjustments.
No, exactly. And obviously, like you said, they were definitely avoiding major population centers when they first moved in. They kind of tried to encircle, Kharkiv in the north, which is, I believe, only around 40 kilometers from the Russian border. So obviously they reached that city very, very quickly on day one. And of course, and here we are, day 5. They still haven't managed to get a foothold in the city, which is obviously, unsurprisingly, caused, well, what I'm going to politely put as some frustration, obviously, in the Russian ranks when we saw, for the first time, like real indiscriminate shelling of the city this morning.
That was a change, and honestly, that deserves its own singular section because that was really, really hard to watch.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's one of those things that, yes, Russia was always going to be capable of doing something like that, but I don't think we ever really expected them to turn around and just start, as you say, indiscriminately shelling cities.
No, I mean, you look at Syria, for example, where, Russia have been not only complicit, but involved in some truly horrific crimes against humanity in Syria over the last, I can't remember exactly what year they formally entered the war. I want to say maybe 13, 14, I believe, maybe even early. I don't think it was earlier. I think it might have been around.
Russians entered Syria because I fucking remember when this happened. Oops, we're gonna bleep that one out, or not. I'll decide because I edit this darn thing.
2015. 2015.
Yeah, I believe it was later than that. Yeah, because they entered at a time when it was really bad for the Syrians.
Yeah. So obviously by 2015, Assad was obviously, well on his, I don't even know what to call it, just massacre throughout the country. Just, again, absolutely horrific shelling, barrel bombs, chemical attacks, you name it, throughout the country. And obviously Russia at that time were, involved. They intervened on the side of Assad, and obviously from that point on we're complicit in his crimes. And then obviously then over the last 7 years now have carried out many of their own. Strikes against hospitals, strikes against civilian infrastructure. A lot of it against like oil infrastructure in the north of Syria. Trying to stop these people from being self-sufficient. So it's no surprise. Everyone knows that Russia was capable of stuff like this. I just don't think anyone, and again, myself included, if you'd asked me, do you think Russia going to start indiscriminately shelling, Ukrainian cities? I would say no, not a chance, because they need to win the propaganda war, don't they? If they're going to overthrow the Zelensky government, which is not going to happen. He's probably the most popular president Ukraine have had in their entire history at the moment.
91% approval rating, I think, today.
Yeah,
he's probably the most popular world leader right now, I would suggest.
No, I think you're probably spot on with that. And I know myself.
Comrade Kim still has 100% approval rating.
Yeah, that's very true. I know, definitely, I was very critical of Zelensky in the lead up to the war, in the kind of how he seemed to be burying his head in the sand and ignoring the signs that the war was coming quick. And I definitely wasn't the only one that was very critical of him. A lot of people were. But again, as critical as we were, I think it was also very understandable that he was trying to protect whilst kind of desperately hoping that the invasion never happened. If he came out and was, I guess, admitted that it was a very real possibility, then that's when the panic starts. That's when the economy goes belly up. That's when you pretty much
his
doing
thinking
Russia's
was
job
understandable.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, it was flawed, but hindsight is 20/20.
Exactly.
It's not like he was. I mean, he kind of. I don't know. I still think that he could have done a bit more to prepare, but at the same time, I wasn't the one calling the shots at the time, and I don't really, get to make those criticisms.
No, exactly. I mean, what's the population of Ukraine? Is it like 70, 80 million?
42, right?
I was like, okay. I was just looking at the size of the country again, and I was like, I was obviously expected it to be a lot more. It's that's surprising. I think I did know that, but I just slipped my mind there. 44. Okay, it's 44 million, but yeah, still you're in charge of 44 million people. Again, I'm not sure if that number includes the Donbass region, which I believe is maybe another 2 million in that region. But you call it 44, 46 maybe. Million people. But yeah, when you're in charge of that many people, I guess it's no matter what he did, he would have been criticized for it. So he was between a rock and a hard place. But regardless of what he did before the war, his actions since the war started have been absolutely incredible. Like he's out, he's walking the streets with his people. I believe he's even been carrying a rifle around. I don't believe he's on the front lines. But the fact that he's just out and about when, there's definitely I'd say larger than a slim chance that there's plans to assassinate him, which would obviously make him a martyr at this stage. But there's definitely, I would say, at least the idea of a plan that maybe to kind of remove Zelensky from one way or the other.
I remember an interview with Zelensky, and I believe it was 2017. When he very specifically and in a very concise manner managed to sort of explain what his leadership style was, and it basically boiled down to lead from the front. Even though some people hate me and view me as a comedian, as a joke, I'll by the time I leave office, I intend to make them believe that I'm for real. Which I think he's done. I don't see anything that that disputes that at this point. But I definitely think there is that element of leading from the front, never say die. Don't give me a plane out of here. Give me more munitions.
That's such a that's gonna be an iconic quote. Like it almost doesn't seem real, does it? It seems if you saw that in like in an action movie, you'd say it's the cheesiest line you've ever heard in your entire life, kind of thing. But the fact that it's real is it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, I think the
And
official translation was, "I don't need a ride. I need more ammunition." And for
which
those
is
of you who aren't aware, that was in response to the Americans offering Zelensky a flight out of Ukraine to safety.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
and of course, Western powers responded by giving him a lot of munitions.
oh, yeah,
So I generally think and that's the other thing. Zelensky has been very good, very incredibly good at interfacing with Western powers, at making himself super presentable, at negotiating and working very closely with with the European countries and with the United States. I think that's been a super important thing. Because again, it's allowed him to, do things like procure a ridiculous number of NLAWs and a ridiculous number of javelins and more stingers, and now the EU is going to send them replacement fighter jets, and
Yeah,
it's just it's sort of this snowballing situation where I'm not saying the Russians aren't going to win, because I won't say that, because they
we don't know.
probably will. But the main thing with that is that the Ukrainians have held on far longer than anyone thought they would. I mean, they still freaking hold Kharkiv. That's just unbelievable at this point. Though the
and
Russians,
Sumy as well, right? Do they still hold Sumy as far
I think there's still heavy fighting in Sumy.
But again, that's another city that, again, just for people that may not know, it's again maybe 30, 40 kilometers from the Russian border. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia map of the invasion, which is, again, as everything Wikipedia does, is absolutely fantastic. It's just very clear to see where the front lines are and where the kind of lines of advance are. And you can kind of see, like, it looks like they tried to take Sumy very early on and have not given up on it, but have pushed on towards
Well,
Kiev.
it was their original theory, which was just bypass things. Unfortunately, that's ended up with them having rear column formations getting ambushed and destroyed, and that isn't exactly great. But I mean, the other issue there is that's changed. We saw that change this morning in Kharkiv.
Yeah.
I mean, they hit an urban area with cluster munitions, and a lot of them.
Does anyone know what the actual death toll was? I saw 12, but I imagine
I'm
that
seeing
grew.
12 right now,
12, yeah.
though people indicate that it's higher. I mean, if you look at what happened, it was particularly horrifying, because I mean, they struck a dense urban residential area early in the afternoon, and anyone who was outside was killed.
Yeah.
It was.
So it's not the first time their use of cluster munitions have killed. So I mean, the kindergarten in
This is the worst one I've seen in a while.
Yeah. I can't remember where that kindergarten was struck. Not the one that was in the Donbass region that was hit by a shell. There was another one, wasn't there, that was being used as a bomb shelter, maybe 2 days ago now. And I'm trying to look at the map.
I would have to dig that up. But yeah, that was another circumstance where
I think that was in the Sumy region.
this was different. The kindergarten, you can say, might have been an accident. It looks like it was a single rocket. This was a large scale artillery assault aimed at a residential area.
Yeah, and I
utilizing cluster munitions. This was not only was this purposeful, this must have the order to do this must have been given at a pretty high level. They knew what they were doing by doing this. This wasn't like an accident. This wasn't like, a random low-level person does something stupid and commits a war crime, or some evil person low down, kills a person. No, this is institutionalized. This is an institutional war crime. This is something that was commanded from a fairly high position in order to get something like this to happen. This reflects a change in strategy.
Yeah, and nothing's been confirmed from, there's been rumors, hasn't there, that Putin is furious with the lack of gains at the moment, and furious with the lack. He's got nothing to show the Russian people, that this has all been worth it at the moment. So the idea that maybe the orders have come down that, okay, you need to take Kharkiv now, you need to take Sumy, you need to take Mariupol, for example. Um, we need. It's been 5 days and we have nothing to show for it, as such at the moment. Um, may have come down the line, and as a result of that, um, and as well, like I'd like to think it's only a coincidence, but there was the video yesterday of the Kharkiv mayor speaking to civilians, saying that the time's kind of coming that we need to, maybe make a deal with the Russians to save civilian lives. And a day later, or not even a day later, 12 hours later, the Russians hugely shell the city with cluster munitions, killing, like I said, at least 11 or 12 at the moment. So it's very possible that that attack was purposeful to kind of, again, with the Kharkiv mayor kind of already saying that, they don't want civilian casualties, and then maybe a mass casualty event like this might push the city a little bit closer to just surrender. Um, Obviously, it could absolutely have the other effect and kind of harden the people's resolves and make things a lot more difficult for the Russians. And to kind of segue a little bit there, we saw obviously a lot of the rifles and being handed out to civilians and people being told to make Molotov cocktails and such, but we hadn't really seen much kind of partisan action until today. I've personally seen a kind of a drive-by Molotoving of a Russian armored column, which was interesting. It seems to be kind of successful as well. The tracks on an armored vehicle definitely caught light, and were burning. And then, of course, there was the RPG fired at a vehicle with a speaker on top telling everyone to kind of remain calm, right? I believe that was the second one.
Yeah, I think Osint Defender shared a tweet a short while ago in our little group chat. Apparently, Ukrainian citizens are throwing Molotov cocktails at the Russians as they tow their broken tanks back to Russia.
Jesus, and that's another thing. Are these, again? I've seen that these, the tanks and armored vehicles are running out of fuel. But again, there's also been the suggestion that they're not running out of fuel so much as that these soldiers are dumping the fuel and abandoning the vehicles because a lot, again, like Russia and Ukraine, first and foremost, the nations are bored with each other. They have a shared language, they have a shared culture. There's families on both sides of the border, and for a lot of these soldiers to be told to suddenly invade a city in which it's not quite civil war, but it's very, very close, I imagine, for a lot of both Ukrainian and Russian soldiers. The difference, the Ukrainians have is they're defending their land. They're not gonna be as hesitant, should we say, about killing, occupiers, invaders, as Russian soldiers might be of shooting a lot of people especially the border cities, again, like Kharkiv, Sumy, stuff like that. It's 30, 40, 50 kilometers to the border. That's in a car, a 45-minute drive, an hour drive. It's absolutely nothing.
Well, there's also the question of, and I know this has been sort of a real question, is, again, the Russians are, I don't like the statement, never attribute, malice to something that could be stupidity. But, I mean, the Russians aren't stupid. There is a reason why things are happening. I mean, someone over at RUSI, I believe it was Justin Bronk, actually made a great argument. And I'll actually, because this was actually a good enough article that I'm going to link this below, that talks about why the Russian Air Force hasn't gotten more involved. And effectively, from what I've seen, I mean, he presents several potential factors, one of which is the lack of precision-guided munitions, which, again, I've talked about before, which could cause issues for, VKS fighters. I mean, you would see issues with that. and so they would have to go in close with unguided munitions and risk getting shot down because, again, the Ukrainian short-range air defense is pretty mature and is a real problem. But the other problem, and again, it all comes back to this issue of precision guided munitions and unguided munitions. One of the strikes we saw in Kharkiv this morning was most likely conducted by an Su-25, or sorry, an Su-34. This brand new 4+ generation jet, but most likely utilized a bomb that was 70 years old in design, probably older. I mean, it was an unguided Fab 500. And one, I think they dropped two, one failed to explode. But there's this issue, and again, it's why we haven't, again, it's my argument. There are people who have disagreed with me on this, and I will give the disclaimer, who are much more, they're much more Russia experts than I am. But my argument has always been one of the main reasons that Russia hasn't been able to completely destroy the Ukrainian Air Force, destroy Ukrainian supply links, is because they don't have the material to do it. They would actually have to get down and deploy fighter aircraft to do short range interdiction and actually get up close to the enemy, which risks a lot of fighter aircraft. On top of that, I do think that the number of calibers they've used, which is their main cruise missile, I mean, I think they've depleted a large portion of their stock of those missiles. The 80 to 150 they've used so far, that's probably most of their stock. Those were used mostly in the first couple of days. And we only saw 2 or 3 hit each Ukrainian airbase, combined with some ballistic missile strikes. I mean, if you look at most Ukrainian air bases, they're still pretty functional. At most of the Ukrainian aircraft losses, they have lost some on the ground, but a lot they lost in the air, causing issues for the Russians. So you've seen, I think, this maturation of an issue that started with the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's that just the Russians have less money to play with. And there was an argument for a while that the Russians were doing more with less. And I think what we've learned is that it's pretty hard to do that. And you end up being in these compromised situations where, you're going to have to, start laying down unguided rockets into civilian areas because, you need to get out the 30 or 40 Ukrainian troops in there, and there's no other way to do it. And you basically have these things where you're forced to do horrific things in order to win. And that's just, they didn't want to do that in the first few days of the war. And now it's not that they're being forced to. They are making the choice to do this. They are making the choice to do these things. They're making the choice to, drop cluster munitions on civilian areas. To honestly, I don't know what Kharkiv was. I legitimately think it was a demonstration of what they could do today, because we didn't see it in any other cities yet. But we have seen them start to mass the troops and mass the material in order to do these large-scale assaults with heavy artillery support and just, cause a huge amount of damage to these cities, which is going to make them look even worse and worse in the international eyes because they are objectively committing crimes against humanity. Like, it's just what they're doing. I mean, they're going to become even more isolated than they already are. It's not going to get better. And,
I mean,
the Ukrainians are going to continue to fight because the more you do stuff like that, the more they get hardened against you. Like, if they kill Zelensky at this point, he would become a folk hero. He would be a martyr. He'd be a folk hero. It wouldn't matter anymore. I think one of those, it's just this essential issue where the Russians thought something fundamentally different than the reality of the situation, committed a bunch of troops to invasion, and now it's falling apart on them. And they're going to be forced to either negotiate with the Ukrainians and get nothing out of this, or do some horrifying things in order to get something out of it. And I don't think it's going to be pretty.
So that's what I was going to say. You have to think of what Putin's original goal was. So again, like you mentioned, it's
Crimea
it looks like they were trying
2014.
to
That was his goal.
yeah. So they were trying to rush Kiev, assume everyone would just lay down their arms, be very grateful that Russia had come to save them from Nazis, and he'd be able to very quickly put in a puppet and be able to walk back to Moscow on a bed of roses. I think that was kind of his dream for what would happen in Ukraine. And again, very quickly, again, obviously the people rallied behind Zelensky, and showed that he's got massive support. And like I said on Twitter, that any kind of Russian puppet that would even if Kiev did fall, any Russian puppet put in that city at the moment is going to have a life expectancy measured in days, if not hours. It's absolutely not feasible. Anyone who took that job would they would
Well,
know
it
it.
depends
They're
on
not
what
going to
the
last long.
Russians intend on doing before making an assault into a city. Do they plan on leveling the city with selective fire support and just basically level section by section and then assault it? Or the problem is at this point the Russians have two options: really, really, really ugly, street to street fighting, i.e., basically turn this into the Ukrainian Stalingrad, or
Or Chechnya.
or Chechnya, which would be bad. Or they can negotiate with the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians have pretty much put their negotiating position as
Fuck off.
you guys completely leave, like
Yeah.
no conditions.
Yeah.
Leave Crimea as well. So you're just in this position where there is no real win for the Russians at this point.
No, exactly. Like I said,
Correction, they can win. They can objectively have a win on the field. They're going to walk away with more than 10,000 dead soldiers, a massive amount of their armored formations taking significant losses, and
ruined economy,
and the entire international community, including China and India, hating them.
Yeah.
And I think that the vote of the UN Security Council the other day is rather telling of just how badly wrong the Russian politicians have got this, because when even China, who would normally veto any UN Security Council resolution that Russia vetoes, turns around and abstains from the vote, I think that says a lot, really, about what China's view of Russia's actions is, and the rest of the world.
No, I agree.
11 votes in favour of the motion, the only vote against being Russia, and the remainder of the 15 being abstentions. That's we're talking Cuban Missile Crisis type UN Security Council voting there, really.
Yeah, and I think like China abstaining is again absolutely huge. Again, it's there's almost not quite a middle finger to Russia, but it's definitely not looking him in the eye when Russia's looking around for allies, isn't it? Yeah. It's definitely China looking away and pretending they haven't seen it. And that's going to be a huge blow to Moscow. And again, Putin, they've again 5 days into the war, they've lost, well, not lost, but they've alienated one of their biggest allies. I'm sure you guys remember in the lead up to the war, there was the whole China signing on to say NATO expansion should stop, and then Russia coming out and saying that Taiwan belongs to China, and that was like really worrying for a period of time then, because it was like here's this new alliance forming, anti-NATO kind of. What's the AUKUS? Is it? I guess in the Australia, US.
I mean, again, that was a primarily Indo-Pacific. Alliance.
But I'm saying Russia-China alliance. Yeah, it's definitely like China back in Russia and Europe, and then Russia back in China in Asia. Is definitely something which concerned a lot of people, and now. I mean, first of all, I think like China's going to be looking at this. I'm looking at Taiwan, who have a lot more sophisticated weapon systems than the Ukrainians have, and a much bigger air force, a much bigger functional air force, and so on. And thinking, is an invasion into Taiwan going to be worth it at this stage? Especially if they can't get it done quickly or as quickly as they're expecting.
I mean,
Because if
they're leaving the door open for it, to be honest. And again, the other issue with a fight with Taiwan is Americans generally support going to war with China over Taiwan at this point, which again is something we've talked about before.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But I think the Chinese are looking at this again and thinking the Russians are having this large of just a mess trying to do this. We're either going to have to level Taiwan in the process and fight a horrible war, or, maybe we just leave Taiwan alone and keep doing what we're doing, and maybe continue projecting power into the South China Sea, where no one can really oppose us in a realistic manner. I really, really think that China is taking a step back after this, looking and seeing, wow, this might not be the best idea, because one, we'll be ostracized for the international community, and two, we might not win. Like, there's a legitimate chance that we might lose, which would be a disaster.
Because one of the things I've mentioned before about Taiwan is, and the US is, if China can invade Taiwan very, very quickly, and kind of get a foothold on the island, there is very little that the US or anyone can do to stop them.
I don't know. At this point, no one knows. Like,
no, that's what I'm saying. So, like, if with Russia, struggling to get to Kiev, which is maybe 50 kilometers from the Belarusian border, and again, Taiwan's is a very small country. I mean, I'm just looking on Google Maps now. I'm trying to get an idea of how far across it. So it's about 120 kilometers wide.
I mean, you got to remember, Taiwan has a population of what? 24 million. It's 14,000 square miles. A large chunk of it is extremely mountainous terrain that is not impassable, but extremely difficult to. I mean, you wouldn't be using mechanized forces at all. The problem in that as well is Taiwan has turned themselves into not a fortress island per se, but it'd be ugly for the Chinese to try to get across and land troops there. And I think the end problem with this is, and connecting it back to Ukraine, I think is more appropriate. But I don't think China wants to risk that, especially because of just the general risks now. Now throw in the fact that, hey, maybe soft power or a combo of soft and hard power in the South China Sea might, lead them towards more gains than actually fighting a war against anything. Because if you're in the South China Sea and you're taking a bunch of reefs, those aren't countries.
No.
They aren't going to fight back. And if, say some misunderstanding happens in the South China Sea and the US and China starts shooting at each other, there's going to be much less of an international backlash, because it's probably going to be a more convoluted situation than China straight up just invading Taiwan. Because if something were to happen in the South China Sea, it would probably happen with an accidental incident between the US and China. So I feel like at this point there might be some people taking a step back in China and just looking at the situation from a more objective plane.
No, I agree.
Or they're panicking and they're saying, shoot, we need to do this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, do it while Russia's already the bad guy. If we're both the bad guys, at least they can back each other a little bit. If there's two guys that are trying to be ostracized, at least they can support each other.
I think that's far less likely, but again...
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think it's likely at all. But
I mean, I don't think they're in the position right now to do anything anyway, so there is that as well.
No.
But yeah, I think, again, if you look at the issue as a whole, Russia has failed with what they wanted to do, at the outset. They didn't get that.
Yeah.
If you saw the leaked stuff, it was very clear that they wanted to install public government within 48 hours.
Yeah, and obviously that matches up with what I mentioned earlier with the Russian state media having an article ready to go 2 days into the war that
Yep.
declaring victory more or less.
They had a plan. That plan did not work. Recalculating at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like the thing that might be going Russia's way at the moment is the battle for Mariupol. That obviously the southern part of Ukraine has been where they've had they've had a lot of success.
You're forcing us to make actual tactical observations, which are going to be wrong by the time it's released anyway.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it seems at the moment, the battle for Mariupol is going Russia's way. I believe, as of last night, they were around 45 kilometers away from the city. I believe that's shorter now. Obviously, I'm not gonna say an exact number. But yeah, they're advancing from the west. They captured the city of Berdyansk yesterday, which is a port on the Sea of Azov, and carried on advancing towards Mariupol, which has been a strategic goal for Russia and the DPR separatists in the Donetsk region since the war started in 2014. That was where there's a lot of heavy fighting in Mariupol in 2014, 2015. Of course, they didn't capture the city. There was a notorious incident of rocket fire being directed at the city in 2015, I believe, which again killed a number of civilians. I mean, hopefully we don't see anything like that again. But it seems at the moment they're advancing on three fronts towards the city. There's not many, armies in the world that can withstand, an assault on three fronts, especially one where, when part of their army is also fighting on another 6 or 7 fronts all over the country. It's not just one city. Yeah, so it seems like in the next,
I think at this point, the Russians do have the issue isn't the forces that Russia has arrayed. That's not the problem. The problem is that they gave themselves restricted engagement parameters, which is understandable. So that's one element. I think the other big element that you have to remember is that they could perform a frontal-ish assault on Ukrainian positions in Kiev and in those places. Sorry, I'm now having to. Okay, Mariupol surrounded. So
yeah, I was waiting for you to. I was waiting for a weird place to jump in.
But I mean, at this point, and I think this is the issue that people forget, is that Russia could very easily take these cities.
Mm-hmm.
In the process, though, they would commit heinous crimes.
Yeah.
Where they would level cities or use large cluster munitions on civilian areas. I think they sent a message today that they were willing to do it in their strike on Kharkiv. That was an objective crime against humanity. It was a war crime. Period. End of story. It was. Killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
Injured even more. And they broadcast that they were willing to do that to other places.
Mm-hmm.
They were very clear about that.
Yeah.
It was a negotiation tactic, and that's probably the most horrifying part about it.
Yeah. I mean, it was very shortly after the negotiations started, wasn't it? In Belarus, it was literally about the same
right as
time.
Negotiations started. The first one happened, then the second one happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They were communicating the fact that they had the material to do that, and they were willing to do that.
Yeah.
And I think we should say that negotiations, they ended with nothing today, didn't they? I believe Ukraine formally applied for EU membership, and the negotiations ended maybe 5 minutes after that, unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
So as things stand, so this is now 8 p.m. on 28th of February. Peace talks kind of broke down. According to a user in the UK defense community Discord, Mariupol is now completely surrounded this evening. So obviously the battle for that city is expected tonight and in the coming days. John, what were you going to say? Sorry, I kind of cut
I
into
was
you.
just going to hop in and say that with the diplomacy side of things, I think Russia has sort of woefully missed the concept of speak softly and carry a big stick. I feel like the way that they went into these talks today, and particularly with, as you say, the strikes that then occurred within minutes of the starts of the meeting, they've kind of gone, instead of speaking softly and carrying the stick, they've gone straight into the meeting and started throwing the stick around the room. Probably a bit of a crude way of looking at it, but at the end of the day, they were adamant they wanted to deal with things diplomatically, and then they've gone and straight away they have started doing things that ultimately the Ukrainians are looking at it and probably thinking, maybe we don't want to negotiate. Maybe we just need to keep fighting.
Yeah. And again, in the negotiations, obviously, in the over the last year, Russia have made a lot of noise about the war in the Donbass, and the so-called acclaimed genocide against Russians in the Donbass, which is just absolute fantasy. And claiming, and of course, then it was the sending of the peacekeepers into the Donbass region and the recognition of the DPR and LPR as independent countries.
Yeah.
So it seemed like they were making a lot of song and dance about being like, okay, this is about the Donbass. It's only about the Donbass. And I started to kind of believe it. I was like, okay, you know what? They probably are going to invade, but they're going to just invade to help the DPR and LPR take the rest of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and that'll be it. Even in my kind of worst case scenarios, I didn't see Russia making a run on Kiev. I saw the troops there as being almost like a insurance to stop Ukraine committing further troops to the east. So, they start war in Donbass, and to prevent, Ukraine pushing all their troops east, they kind of leave a force near Kiev to kind of, force Ukraine to defend that front if and when it happened. I never actually expected Russia to make a play for the city.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, maybe as surprised as, if we're to believe a lot of world leaders when Russia eventually did, go for Kiev. So obviously the whole Donbass region thing, it was all just, smoke and mirrors. I don't think Russia cares at all about not native, ethnic Russians in the Donbass region. I'm sure he says he does.
Because it was a wedge to make sure Ukraine couldn't join NATO.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And, I mean, yeah, there's not that much that could be done about that. There really isn't. At the end of the day, look, the Ukrainians are going to have to. If the Ukrainians want to remain a country, they're going to have to beat the Russians.
Yeah.
They could, at this point, do it. There is a possibility.
They
definitely not in their favor. They would have to pull a lot of shit out of their hats.
Yeah.
They would really have to pull some stuff off.
They are ultimately fighting for their survival. And as I tweeted earlier in the week, a nation's army is never more dangerous than when they are on their own soil fighting for their very existence. It's a completely different mindset to sending troops overseas to fight in a war, whatever justification there might be for that war. When your troops are fighting for your own country to ensure that A, it continues to exist, and B, that your families and your friends are still there when it's all over, that again, as we've said so many times already this episode, the Russians really underestimated the resolve of the Ukrainian people.
I think they believe their own propaganda too much.
Yeah.
Again, I think they genuinely believe, and again, there's absolutely propaganda on both sides. But I saw, I believe it was on Reddit earlier, there was apparently a mobile phone taken from a killed Russian soldier, and there was text messages, to his mother in which, he was saying, they were told they were Nazis. They were told that they were going to be liberators. They were told that they were fighting Nazism. And then when they've got to Ukraine, they've found just ordinary people kind of standing in the streets blocking tank columns. Not unlike, the gentleman in Tiananmen Square in '89, I want to say. So, yeah, and, and being called fascists and having, bricks and rocks thrown at them. And I believe there's even a video this morning of just one Ukrainian, it looked like quite an elderly fella, just walking up to a Russian soldier and punching him in the face. It is, they're absolutely not being greeted as liberators as they seem to think they were going to be.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't even think it was propaganda fed to the soldiers. I believe, Putin himself thought that they were going to be greeted as liberators when they came into Ukraine, and people were going to be happy that the Russians were here to save them from the evil Nazi Kiev regime, which again, fantasy. And even if kind of go into the Putin's speech ahead of the recognition of the Donbass and Luhansk republics, it seemed like a lot of the Russian officials were not on board with the plan, should we say, especially Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. Yeah, foreign minister, right?
Yeah, he is.
I got confused between him and it's the Minister of Defense. But yeah, it seemed Lavrov. There was a great screenshot seeing. Obviously, screenshots can be taken out of context. But it was at the moment when Putin mentioned recognition, and the camera was on Lavrov, and it looked like cringing, massively cringing.
Yeah.
And even. Sorry, go on.
Go on. There was that video as well of Putin having that meeting with senior officials, and that exchange between him and the head of his intelligence community. And it was very apparent, for those of you who haven't seen the video, some people put the English translation over the top, and it was very obvious from the body language and the way in which both Putin and his head of intelligence were talking, that this guy was not singing from the same hymn sheet when it came to recognising these two parts of Ukraine as independent states. And even, I get the impression he was very much not on board with any idea of using military force for it as well. And I don't know how many others in the room probably felt the same way, but Putin's response was very... What's the word I'm looking for? Not condescending towards him, but...
It's very dismissive, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
I think condescending is the right word. There was a bit of a grin on his face, it seemed, when he was enjoying dressing him down. Not dressing him down, but there was very clearly disagreement. And of course, that was maybe two examples in a room of maybe 15 senior officials and Putin. So there was definitely some, I don't want to use the word dissent, which is quite a strong word, but disagreement. And that was just whilst talking about the recognition of the republics. This wasn't even talking about a full military invasion of Ukraine as we're seeing now.
Yeah.
So if they were openly opposed to just recognizing the republics and worried about what the impact that might have, you have to imagine they were much more opposed to a full military operation. And of course, these are the kind of rumors we are hearing. Obviously, nothing at all substantiated. But the rumors that Putin has fired some generals, that Putin has, thinking about some kind of reshuffles. And obviously, this is leading to the rumors, well, not even rumors, the theories that if things continue going badly for Russia and for Putin, and if he continues acting irrationally, and if he starts maybe trying to think about dismissing his top generals, it's not out of the question that there could be a palace coup, and the something which would be absolutely insane to happen.
I still think we're a bit far off from something.
Oh no, I don't think it's I don't think it's likely at all.
The main issue that I think is will Russian commanders be willing to effectively raise a bunch of Ukrainian cities?
Yeah.
And that is a real question.
Yeah, it is the $1 million question, and we don't have an answer ultimately, because we cannot see inside the heads of the Russian generals right now. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in one of their meetings right now and see what their mood and their morale is around all of this, because I mean, if the troops on the ground and the apparent morale that they've got is anything to go by, it's any wonder really that the Russian army hasn't just ground to a halt and stopped fighting altogether.
Anyone got anything else we can particularly focus on before we maybe look to wrap up? I think we've covered a lot of things, haven't we?
I was going to effectively add, I don't think we really leave this incident the same. I don't think the world leaves this incident the same it was before it started.
Yeah.
Things have fundamentally changed.
Mm-hmm.
They will not come. We will not return to whatever the status quo was before. We just won't.
Yeah.
That's.
No.
I think that is out of the equation. And in effect, I think we're going to have to sort of watch that happen and watch that occur. But I again, lines were crossed here.
Mm-hmm.
Lines were significantly crossed. And, I mean, everyone was, at least in the West was very clear about what would happen. Russia's economy would implode if Putin decided to go into Ukraine. And Putin decided to do that. And again, lines were crossed. And now he's in a position where he didn't win in the first 48 hours. He didn't install a puppet government. It's very clear to legitimately most people in the world that the Ukrainians aren't going to accept him. And we'll see where it goes from there.
No, I
it's a horrible situation. It is truly one of the worst situations I've seen because it is entirely self-inflicted.
Yeah.
There was a single decision point made, and I know the US was very clear about this, was that Putin has made his decision, but he's the only person in charge of this, and he is the one person that can say no to this. And this was the decision of one person. That's all I can say, is that it was one person who did this.
And it is only going to get worse for him. I mean, I'm just sitting here at the moment thinking I'm kind of surprised that Ukraine's President Zelensky hasn't gotten up and given a pretty much word for word copy speech from Independence Day. The whole "we are not going to go quietly into the night."
Yeah.
Because I think it's fair to say that the mood in Ukraine is reasonably good considering what they are facing, and it's only going to get better. And I think we've seen on social media, generally speaking, a huge indication of global support for Ukraine. And as you say, Russia is not going to recover from that. The world is going to be a very, very different place when all of this is over, because it's the biggest miscalculation, biggest military miscalculation, I think, probably since Hitler decided to try and invade Russia in the Second World War.
No, I agree. And going back to your comment about surprise Zelensky hasn't made the speech. There have been some absolutely insane statements made in terms of impact. I don't know if you saw the one, I believe it was today, of the Ukrainian ambassador to the UN, when he was referencing Putin's suggestion that or implication of nuclear weapons, when he said something along the lines of, if Putin wants to kill himself, he doesn't need to use nukes. He just has to copy what someone did in Berlin in 1945.
Yeah.
And it was just like an absolutely insane statement to make, and it kind of shows exactly the kind of confidence that the Ukrainians have at the moment, that they're coming out and making these kind of statements, openly mocking and towards Putin. And even when they went into the peace talks, 5 days into a war with Russia, they went into a peace talks and demanded, pretty much a full surrender, and that Ukraine and Russia withdraws all their troops.
Yeah.
Which would be, I mean, if you'd said that again like a week ago, that Ukraine would be demanded Russia surrender 5 days in, I'd think you were insane. I'd think that was a completely ridiculous thing.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not sure it was a genuine demand, but definitely one in which they said before they weren't gonna capitulate, they weren't gonna give up any land, they weren't going to agree to be neutral, and again reinforced that by applying for EU membership in the middle of the negotiations, which is just incredible. I mean, again, it's not going to be accepted, is it?
Well, I mean,
especially.
We'll have to wait and see. Let's not make any predictions that will come back to bite us in a couple of months, because
a couple of days of the way things go and the speed things are happening.
Yeah, I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago that Technical and I were having a chat with Cassius Spelly, and I mean, we sort of said,
ping him, see if he's still awake. I want to bring him back on. Go ping him. We'll do this live.
No.
We'll do this live. Darn it.
Opinion, as did several other members of the community, that a Russian invasion was very unlikely, if not just never going to happen. And I think to be fair, we were probably, I wouldn't say fairly evenly split in the community, but I'd say that
he definitely wasn't on his own thinking that.
He wasn't on his own. There was respect for the opinion that him and others were expressing, that this wasn't going to happen.
And I can see where he was coming from, since 2014, when Russia invaded the first time. I mean, there's been multiple false alarms. I believe 2018 and 2020 as well. There was, a genuine concern that Russia was planning to invade. There was a massive uptick in fighting in the Donbass. So it was very much a bit like, I guess for Cassius and other accounts again who were on the other side of the opinion to ourselves, is it was very much God, what's the story? The boy that cried wolf. Like a boy that cried wolf for a lot of people. In that, it was constantly, the Russians are coming, and then they never did. And I believe, I wouldn't be surprised if that was Russia's plan all along, and obviously why Zelensky was so dismissive to begin with. He was like, well, we've been at war since 2014. I don't, no matter how many troops are on a Russian border, I don't think they're going to, fully invade us. It's completely understandable why people in Ukraine and respected Osint accounts and just respected analysts in general also thought that Russia wouldn't invade. And I went through my own phase myself. I was always fairly confident it would happen. But it got to a point in mid-January and start of February when I was I was starting to think, well, it doesn't actually look like it's going to happen anymore. And then something would happen the next day and it would put me back on, okay, no, it's actually happening. My opinion kind of fluctuated quite a lot, but I was always...
You're not alone. I came out very clearly and said that, as far as I was concerned, if an invasion hadn't occurred by the 20th of February, the chances of it happening would steadily decrease towards the end of the month. And of course, as it turns out, I probably should have just given myself a few extra days leeway just to try and factor in Russia's unpredictability.
I mean, I will say there were certain individuals who seemed to be taking a victory lap sometime in mid-February about everyone, who said there was going to be an invasion being wrong, and oh, that darn intelligence community, getting it wrong again. And I think, there's certainly a lot of stuff we need to talk about on that front. But I think that's for
another episode.
That's for another episode, yeah.
For down the road. It's just, yeah.
Well, we just want to sort of discuss obviously the future of the podcast. As I mentioned, this is the season 2 finale. There is going to be a short break after the end of season 2, probably not more than a couple of weeks anyway, so you probably won't notice an awful lot with our schedule anyway. But we are going to be doing a season 3 in the next couple of months. Season 3 is going to be live streamed, so you guys will be able to actually tune in, listen to us as we record, and we're probably going to end up doing some Q&A sessions as well. At the moment, the plan is that we are going to be doing that via twitch.tv, although there is a good chance that we are also going to be looking to host at least one of those episodes on Twitter's Spaces, which I will have to defer to Kyle and Technical to explain, because I have no idea what that's all about.
Expect a couple of testing sessions that may just, be some jawing and talking, as we sort of try to figure out the best way to host a live episode. Because, look, I'm not going to trash our last live episode, but it was kind of a bit of a mess. But of course, this is something we want to put out a very high quality product, and you'll see some testing. That's all we can say for now. And until then, act like everything else is sort of up in the wind, because it is. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. I know we discussed some pretty heavy topics. This obviously is something that we haven't done as much on the show, but I would really like to thank John and Kyle for helping out and for putting together such a good third season, right? I don't remember. One of the seasons that we're on.
Yeah, we're getting there.
I'm only the editor. But I obviously, I'd also like to thank all the guests who came on this season to provide their insight. We have had so many that I can't even name them. Phoenix, Intel Doge, Ace Jace, Aleph, Brian, who else? I'm probably missing a bunch of names,
Intel, Casus Belli. I think you mentioned Israel Radar already as well. And obviously
there was 2 French guys, right? There was Casus. Do you say French Radar?
Casus and Phoenix. I mentioned them both, but thank you, all of you who came onto the show. It's a really
one of you.
And it makes us feel really good that we are sort of part of the community and we're able to bring people together. We hope to have people on again. Next season is going to be another experiment, but we are really, really thankful that the community recognizes us and has sort of brought us into the fold. And we are thankful for that. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope to see you in the near future.